You look like you wandered into the wrong ballroom. The words landed softly, almost casually, but in a room filled with crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, and billion-dollar smiles, they cut deeper than a scream ever could. The VIP gala at the Langford Manhattan glittered like something out of a magazine cover. Waiters in white gloves floated across polished marble floors, carrying trays of champagne. A jazz quartet played beneath golden lights that reflected against 20-foot windows overlooking the New York skyline. Every person in the ballroom looked expensive. Every laugh sounded practiced. And standing near the edge of the grand staircase, clutching a leather portfolio against her chest, Claire Bennett suddenly felt painfully visible. She had spent 40 minutes in the company restroom hemming the edge of her black dress with a hotel sewing kit because the fabric had torn on the subway ride downtown. Her heels pinched. One earring was missing its backing. And despite pulling her hair into a sleek knot 3 separate times, loose strands still framed her face from the rain outside. She should have stayed invisible. That was always easier. Claire. Adrian Whitmore's voice carried smoothly over the low hum of conversation. Calm. Controlled. The kind of voice investors trusted instantly. She looked up too fast. I finished revising your speech, she said quietly, stepping toward him with the folder in both hands. Adrian barely glanced at it. His sharp gray suit looked tailored directly onto his body, every detail perfect down to the silver cufflinks catching the ballroom light. Around him stood board members, politicians, socialites, people who treated wealth like a second language. Then his eyes moved over Claire. Slowly, deliberately. From her worn heels to the stitched hemline, she prayed no one would notice. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. You look like you wandered into the wrong ballroom. A few people nearby laughed politely, not loudly. That somehow made it worse. Claire felt heat crawl up her neck. Her fingers tightened around the portfolio hard enough to bend the corners. Adrian took the speech from her without noticing. Or maybe he noticed and simply didn't care. Relax, he added smoothly, already turning back toward the investors beside him. Nobody's looking at you anyway. The words should not have hurt. She told herself that immediately. Men like Adrian Whitmore lived in a world where people were measured by headlines, watches, and last names. Men like him didn't mean to sound cruel, but that didn't stop the sting from settling into her chest. Claire forced herself to breathe evenly, smile politely, blend back into the walls where assistance belonged. Because rent was due in 4 days. Because her mother's dialysis treatment cost more than Claire made in a month. Because swallowing pride was cheaper than unemployment. Across the ballroom, enormous digital screens suddenly flickered. Once, twice. Then every screen in the room turned black. The jazz music cut out mid-note. Conversation stalled instantly. Confused murmurs spread beneath the chandeliers. Adrian frowned sharply. What the hell? One of the investors pulled out his phone. Another whispered something about the live stream crashing. Then a giant image flashed across the central screen above the ballroom stage. A headline appeared in bold white letters. Whitmore Capital accused of exploiting lower-wage employees. Another screen lit up. Then another. Internal payroll numbers. Anonymous employee complaints. Leaked documents scrolling one after another across 20-foot displays for every journalist in Manhattan to see. Gasps rippled through the room. Camera flashes exploded immediately. Adrian's jaw tightened. Shut it down, he snapped at the tech coordinator, rushing toward the stage. Now! But nobody moved fast enough. Reporters were already filming. Investors looked furious. Someone near the bar muttered, "This company's dead by morning." Claire stared at the screens, her pulse quickening. Then she noticed something nobody else did. One file name repeated in the corner of every leaked document. The date format was wrong. European formatting, not American. Her stomach dropped. She stepped toward Adrian instinctively. "It's not your internal server," she said quickly under her breath. He barely looked at her. "Not now. Claire. No, listen to me." For the first time that night, her voice sharpened with certainty. This leak was uploaded externally through the live stream software. If you shut the system down completely, every financial station in New York will report you panicked. Adrian finally turned toward her fully. The ballroom noise blurred around them. "So what do we do?" he asked coldly. Claire swallowed once, then looked toward the giant screens glowing above the stunned crowd. "You walk on that stage," she said quietly, "before this room decides who you are for you." Adrian Whitmore had spent 12 years building a reputation that could survive headlines, lawsuits, and market crashes. But as he stepped onto the ballroom stage beneath the blinding camera lights, he realized reputation meant nothing if panic reached the room first. The giant screens still glowed behind him with leaked reports and accusations, while reporters crowded closer like wolves scenting blood in the snow. Yet Adrian's face remained calm, controlled, almost unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly into the microphone, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. "If anyone here believes Whitmore Capital hides from difficult conversations, then you clearly do not know my company." The room quieted just enough. Claire stood near the side entrance, gripping her phone tightly, watching him recover in real time. It was terrifying how good he was at it. He did not stumble once, did not raise his voice, did not let them see fear. The information displayed tonight was obtained illegally through a third-party attack targeting this event's media servers, Adrian continued. "And unlike whoever orchestrated this stunt, I do not intend to hide behind anonymous screens." Some investors still looked uneasy, but the tension shifted slightly. "Not gone, just redirected." Claire exhaled carefully. He listened. That alone surprised her more than it should have. 30 minutes later, the ballroom had partially stabilized. The screens were dark again. Music returned cautiously. Reporters still circled like sharks, but the disaster had stopped bleeding long enough for Adrian to breathe. Claire slipped quietly toward the service hallway, hoping to disappear before anyone noticed her again. "Claire!" She froze instantly. Adrian stood near the corridor entrance with one hand in his pocket, his tie loosened slightly now. For the first time all evening, he looked tired. "You figured out the breach in less than 30 seconds, he said. "Ow!" Claire adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. The coding format was European. Your internal systems are American standard. Adrian studied her for a moment like he was seeing a stranger wearing her face. "You never mentioned you understood cybersecurity." She almost laughed at that. There were hundreds of things Adrian Whitmore did not know about her. Instead, she answered quietly, "You never asked." The silence that followed felt strange, heavy in a different way than before. Somewhere deeper in the hallway, hotel staff rolled silver carts across marble floors. The scent of expensive perfume still lingered from the ballroom behind them. Adrian glanced toward the closed doors, then back at her. "You should have said something earlier." Claire's eyes lifted slowly. "About what?" He hesitated, maybe realizing too late how many things fit inside that question. Then his expression hardened again, the polished CEO mask sliding neatly back into place. "About your qualifications." "Of course. Not the humiliation, not the comment. Qualifications." Claire nodded once. "Good night, Mr. Whitmore." She walked away before he could answer. Outside, Manhattan felt colder than usual. Wind rushed between skyscrapers while headlights reflected off rain-slick streets. Claire pulled her coat tighter and hurried down the subway stairs, exhaustion settling into her bones now that adrenaline had faded. Her phone buzzed twice before she even reached the platform. First message, hospital billing reminder. Second notice, payment overdue. Her chest tightened instantly. She closed her eyes for 1 second too long as commuters rushed around her. Then she opened her banking app anyway. $412. That was all she had left after rent. $412 against medical bills that looked more like phone numbers every month. By the time she reached Queens, it was almost midnight. The apartment building smelled faintly like bleach and old radiator heat. Claire climbed 4 flights of stairs quietly and unlocked the door without turning on the lights. Her mother was asleep on the couch again beneath a knitted blanket, television flickering silently across her tired face. The dialysis medication sat lined neatly on the coffee table beside overdue notices Claire had hidden beneath a magazine earlier that week. For a moment, Claire simply stood there in silence. The Gala suddenly felt unreal now. like another planet entirely. Crystal chandeliers, Toujo dollar dresses, men debating mergers over champagne while she counted subway fare and prescription refills. She slipped off her heels carefully and crossed to the tiny kitchen. The refrigerator held yogurt, half a gallon of milk, and leftover soup. She opened the cabinet above the sink instead. Inside sat a worn dark brown notebook with softened corners and pages packed tightly with handwriting. Claire pulled it down gently. Every idea, every proposal, every market strategy Adrian had praised in executive meetings over the last 2 years lived inside that notebook. But her name had never appeared on any presentation. Assistant work, they called it. Organizing, supporting, invisible labor dressed in polite language. Claire flipped through page after page filled with late-night thoughts and annotated reports until one sketch slipped loose onto the floor. A rough pencil drawing of a ballroom entrance. A woman standing alone beneath giant chandeliers, smaller than the room around her. Claire stared at it quietly. Then she looked down at the white satin gloves folded carefully beside the notebook. Her mother's gloves, worn once at a charity gala almost 20 years ago before illness and debt slowly shrank their world apartment by apartment. Claire touched the fabric gently between her fingers. Elegance is survival, her mother used to say whenever life became unbearable. Claire never fully understood it growing up. Tonight she finally did. The next morning, Whitmore Capital looked less like a billion-dollar company and more like a building. Trying not to drown. Television screens inside the executive lobby replayed footage from the gala on a nonstop loop while assistants hurried between elevators carrying tablets and coffee like oxygen tanks during a fire. Headlines crawled across financial networks in aggressive red banners. Elitist CEO under fire. Whitmore Capital faces backlash after VIP Gala incident. Claire kept her eyes lowered as she crossed the marble lobby with her laptop bag against her shoulder. Nobody greeted her this morning. Half the employees looked terrified. The other half looked curious. She understood why. Viral clips from the gala had spread overnight. Unfortunately, one of those clips included Adrian's comment to her near the staircase. "You look like you wandered into the wrong ballroom." Millions of views by sunrise. Internet outrage moved fast. Faster than truth. Claire. She stopped outside the elevator as Nathan Cole from corporate communications rushed toward her with his tie crooked and phone pressed against his ear. "Boardroom. Now." She blinked. "Me? Trust me, I did not ask questions." The executive boardroom sat on the 46th floor, surrounded by glass walls overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Usually Claire only entered to deliver reports or coffee. Today, every seat at the polished black table was occupied. Board members, investors, senior executives, even the legal team. Adrian stood near the windows in a charcoal suit, expression unreadable as always. But the room itself felt nervous in a way she had never seen before. One older investor tossed a newspaper onto the table the second she entered. There she is. Claire froze. Her own face stared back at her from the front page beside Adrian beneath the headline. The assistant who exposed a CEO's arrogance. Heat crawled in her cheeks immediately. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. "Sit down, Claire," he said calmly. She obeyed quietly, confusion building in her chest. A silver-haired board member leaned forward first. "Miss Bennett, according to our internal review, you prevented a complete media collapse last night." Claire nodded cautiously. "I only identified the source of the breach, which our cybersecurity consultants failed to do for almost 11 minutes. Another executive interrupted. "Do you understand how catastrophic 11 minutes can be on Wall Street?" She did. Unfortunately, Adrian finally stepped toward the table. "The problem is no longer the hack," he said evenly. "It is perception." He tapped a remote control once. A new slide appeared on the giant screen behind him. Public approval ratings, investor confidence graphs, social media analytics, every number dropping hard. Claire stared quietly. "People think Whitmore Capital represents wealth disconnected from reality," Adrian continued. "And after last night, they have a face for that narrative. His eyes met hers briefly. Not cold this time. Worse. Honest. The room remained silent for several seconds before a woman from public relations spoke carefully. We need to humanize the company immediately. Another board member nodded. Community outreach. Charity visibility. Employee advocacy. Then the silver-haired investor looked directly at Claire. And we need her. Claire blinked. I'm sorry. America loves authenticity, the woman explained. You are relatable, intelligent, grounded. The exact opposite of every accusation currently attached to this company. Claire almost laughed from disbelief. Yesterday, she was invisible. Today, she was a strategy. Adrian crossed his arms slowly. The board wants you to appear beside me during the Whitmore Foundation Charity Series next month. Appear beside you? Claire repeated carefully. As what? Nobody answered immediately. That told her enough. The public relations director finally cleared her throat. As a representation of the company's values. Claire stared at them in stunned silence. Representation. Values. Not one person mentioned her actual job, or the fact that she was sitting there because she had cleaned up a disaster nobody else caught. No, she said quietly. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly. Claire. She stood slowly from her chair. I am your assistant, Mr. Whitmore. Not a sympathy campaign. The room grew still. For a second, nobody moved. Then Claire's phone buzzed inside her coat pocket. Once. Twice. Instinctively, she glanced down. New payment required before treatment approval. The message felt like ice water down her spine. Her mother's clinic. Claire swallowed hard and locked her phone quickly, but not before Adrian noticed the panic flicker across her face. He did not speak right away. Instead, he walked slowly toward the window, overlooking the city before speaking again, quieter this time. The foundation events include full compensation, he said, and medical coverage. Claire's breath caught. She hated that he noticed exactly where to strike. Temporary partnership agreement, Adrian added carefully. Strictly professional. She looked at him across the massive boardroom table, searching for mockery, arrogance, superiority. But his expression remained calm, controlled, maybe even sincere. That almost made it harder. How long? She asked quietly. 6 weeks, Adrian answered. Public appearances only. The room waited. Investors, executives, people with million-dollar watches measuring her silence like another business risk. Claire looked down at her hands, resting beside the old leather notebook she carried everywhere. Then she thought about overdue bills taped inside kitchen cabinets. Hospital hallways. Her mother pretending not to cough, so Claire could sleep before work. 6 weeks. Fine, she whispered finally. Business only. Adrian nodded once. Professional. Clean. Controlled. But as Claire gathered her notebook and turned toward the door, she missed the brief look exchange between two board members near the far end of the table. Relief. Not because the company was saved yet. Because for the first time since the scandal began, Adrian Whitmore had actually listened to someone other than himself. 3 days later, Claire Bennett stood in the middle of an Upper East Side designer showroom, feeling completely out of place again. Soft piano music drifted through the elegant white space while racks of couture gowns stretched beneath golden lighting like pieces of museum art. Every dress probably cost more than her yearly rent. Claire folded her arms tighter instinctively. You look terrified, Adrian said from behind her. She turned sharply. He stood near the entrance in a dark navy coat, one hand in his pocket, looking frustratingly composed as always. I am terrified, Claire admitted quietly. That is healthy. It means you understand this world is dangerous. She stared at him. You make charity luncheons sound like organized crime. Sometimes they are. For the first time since the gala, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not enough to call it a smile, but enough to surprise her. A stylist approached, carrying 3 garment bags carefully draped across her arms. Mr. Whitmore, she said warmly. Everything has been prepared. Claire immediately shook her head. No, absolutely not. Adrian looked amused already. You have not even seen them. I cannot wear dresses that cost more than a car payment. You are attending events with senators and media executives, Adrian replied calmly. You cannot show up looking afraid of your own zipper. Claire exhaled slowly and glanced around the showroom again. Women in sleek black outfits floated between mirrors, adjusting fabric with delicate fingers while assistants offered espresso on silver trays. It all felt unreal. Adrian noticed the tension in her shoulders immediately. Claire, his voice softened slightly. Nobody here is better than you. Her eyes lifted toward his. That is easy for you to say. Silence lingered between them for half a second too long. Then Adrian surprised her again. No, he said quietly. It is not. The stylist disappeared behind the fitting rooms while Claire stood awkwardly near a velvet chair, trying not to touch anything expensive. Adrian walked toward a nearby table covered in jewelry cases and event invitations. The first fundraiser is Saturday night, he said. Children's Literacy Foundation in Brooklyn. You hate these events, do not you? Claire asked before she could stop herself. Adrian glanced at her sideways. I hate performative generosity. And this is not performative. He looked down briefly at the invitation in his hand. That depends who is standing beside me. Claire did not know what to say to that. The fitting room curtain suddenly opened. Miss Bennett, the stylist called brightly. Whenever you are. Ready. 20 minutes later, Claire stepped cautiously back into the showroom, wearing a simple champagne-colored gown that skimmed softly across her frame without glitter or dramatic embellishment. Elegant, understated, nothing like the loud designer pieces displayed around the room. She stopped near the mirror uncertainly. Adrian looked up from his phone, then froze. Completely. The room seemed to quiet around them for one strange, suspended second. Claire shifted uncomfortably beneath his stare. It is too much, she said immediately. No, Adrian answered before she finished speaking. His voice sounded lower now. Rougher somehow. It is exactly enough. Heat rose into her cheeks instantly. The stylist beamed. The silhouette works beautifully with her posture. Claire almost laughed nervously. My posture comes from years of carrying office printers up broken apartment stairs. Adrian looked at her again. You joke about things most people would complain about for months. Most people are allowed to complain. Something unreadable crossed his expression then. Guilt maybe. Before either of them could speak again, Claire reached in her bag and carefully removed the folded white satin gloves from inside her notebook. The fabric looked delicate against the expensive showroom lighting. Adrian noticed instantly. What are those? Claire ran her fingers gently across the gloves. My mother's. Her voice softened automatically. She wore them to a charity gala when she was younger. Before everything got complicated, Adrian watched quietly as she slipped them on. Suddenly the entire look transformed. Not richer, not louder, more graceful, like she belonged inside every chandelier-lit ballroom she had ever avoided. Even the stylist stared for a moment. Those are stunning, she whispered. Claire smiled faintly. They are old. No, Adrian said quietly from across the room. They are history. Claire looked toward him again, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Adrian stepped closer slowly, adjusting the cuff of his watch absent-mindedly. Where did your mother get them? A thrift shop in Philadelphia for $12, Claire answered softly. She used to. Say elegance had nothing to do with money. Adrian's eyes remained on the gloves. What did it have to do with? Claire hesitated, then smiled sadly. Survival. Something in Adrian's face shifted again at that word. Not attraction exactly. Recognition. As if for one brief moment, he understood that Claire Bennett had spent her entire life learning how to walk through rooms designed to make people like her feel small. And somehow she never became bitter. Outside the showroom windows, Manhattan glowed gold beneath the early evening sky, while traffic crawled through the streets below. Inside, surrounded by couture and crystal mirrors, Adrian Whitmore realized something deeply inconvenient. The woman he once dismissed as invisible had somehow become the only person in his world who still felt completely real. Saturday night arrived wrapped in gold light and camera flashes. The Brooklyn Children's Literacy Foundation occupied an old restored theater overlooking the East River, transformed for one evening into a palace of crystal glasses, velvet curtains, and New York money pretending to care about charity. Black SUVs lined the street outside, while reporters shouted names through the cold evening air. Inside, a 40-foot chandelier glowed above hundreds of guests dressed in silk and diamonds. Claire stood alone in a private side hallway, staring at her reflection one final time. The champagne-colored gown flowed softly around her without trying too hard. Her hair rested in smooth waves against one shoulder, and on her hands, the white satin gloves from her mother looked almost luminous beneath the warm lights. She barely recognized herself, not because she suddenly looked wealthy, because for the first time in years, she did not look exhausted. A knock sounded gently against the door behind her. "We are about to go in," Adrian's voice said from the hallway. Claire inhaled slowly before opening the door. Adrian stood there in a black tuxedo that fit him with impossible precision, one hand adjusting the silver cufflink at his wrist. But the second he looked at her, the movement stopped completely. His eyes traveled over her quietly. Not rushed, not performative, just stunned. Claire suddenly became very aware of her heartbeat. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. Adrian blinked, once like he had forgotten where he was. "No," he answered carefully. "That is the problem." Before she could respond, voices drifted toward them from the ballroom entrance. Reporters, investors, socialites. Adrian straightened immediately, slipping his public mask back into place. "Ready?" Claire looked toward the glowing ballroom doors ahead of them. Last week, she would have said no without hesitation. Tonight, she lifted her chin slightly instead. "Ready enough." The ballroom announcer's voice echoed softly through hidden speakers. "Mr. Adrian Whitmore and Miss Claire Bennett." The doors opened. Conversations slowed almost instantly. Claire felt it before she fully stepped inside. The shift in the room. Heads turning. Whispers pausing mid-sentence. Adrian offered his arm calmly. Claire accepted it with careful grace, and together they crossed into the sea of chandeliers and camera flashes. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody smirked at her dress or glanced dismissively at her shoes. Instead, the room watched in complete silence, because Claire Bennett did not enter the ballroom looking like someone pretending to belong there. She walked in like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. Camera flashes burst rapidly now. Journalists called Adrian's name, but Adrian barely noticed any of them. His attention kept drifting sideways toward Claire as they moved across the polished floor together. "Do not look so nervous," he murmured quietly near her ear. Claire almost smiled. "Easy for you to say. You own half the room. Tonight they are looking at you, not me." Before Claire could answer, a familiar voice cut sharply through the music. "Well, this is unexpected." Vanessa Hale approached from near the Champagne Tower, wearing a silver designer gown that shimmered beneath the ballroom lights. Tall, perfectly poised, beautiful in the cold, polished way magazine covers loved. Claire immediately recognized her from business articles and charity galas beside Adrian years earlier. Adrian's expression hardened almost invisibly. Vanessa's eyes moved slowly toward Claire's gloves. Her smile never reached her eyes. "I heard the company hired a public relations assistant," she said lightly. "I did not realize they meant a full Cinderella campaign." A few nearby guests shifted awkwardly. Claire felt the old instinct rise immediately. Stay quiet. Stay small. Survive. Vanessa stepped closer. "You know, these events can be overwhelming for people unfamiliar with high society." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That is enough, Vanessa." But Claire surprised even herself. She smiled softly instead. Calm, elegant, unshaken. "You are absolutely right," she said gently. Vanessa blinked slightly. Claire continued. "Fortunately, kindness costs nothing, so even people unfamiliar with high society can still afford good manners." Silence. Sharp and immediate. Nearby guests looked away trying to hide smiles. One reporter nearly choked on champagne. Vanessa's expression flickered for one dangerous second before smoothing again. Adrian looked at Claire differently after that. Not amused. Not impressed. Something deeper. Respect. Real respect. Vanessa gave a tight smile and drifted back toward the crowd, but the damage was already done. Claire had not merely survived the moment. She had owned it. Adrian leaned slightly closer beside her. Where exactly did you learn to do that? Claire glanced toward the glowing ballroom around them. When you grow up poor, she said quietly, you learn very quickly how to stay calm while people try to embarrass you. Adrian looked down briefly like the answer hit somewhere uncomfortable inside him. Across the ballroom, the orchestra began another slow jazz arrangement while guests returned cautiously to conversation. But something fundamental had shifted tonight. The room no longer saw Claire Bennett as an assistant standing beside a powerful man. They saw her as a woman powerful enough to stand there without disappearing. And for the first time in years, Adrian Whitmore realized admiration could feel dangerously close to regret. By the end of the evening, Claire could feel the exhaustion settling beneath her skin like heavy rain. Smiling politely for cameras was somehow more draining than working 12-hour office shifts. Every conversation tonight carried invisible rules. Every compliment sounded half-strategic. Every laugh felt measured. Yet beside Adrian, she managed to survive it. Barely. The final donors drifted toward the theater exits around midnight, while staff quietly cleared crystal glasses from linen-covered tables. Outside the tall windows, Brooklyn shimmered beneath cold silver rain. Claire stood near the balcony doors, rubbing her temples lightly when Adrian approached carrying 2 untouched cups of coffee. You disappeared, he said. She accepted the cup carefully. I needed 30 seconds without billionaires discussing philanthropy like it is a stock option. Adrian gave the faintest huff of laughter. Fair criticism. Claire leaned against the balcony railing and stared out across the river toward Manhattan, glowing in the distance. Did we save the company tonight? She asked softly. Adrian stood beside her in silence for a moment before answering. Maybe. That sounds optimistic. For me, it is. The wind outside rattled faintly against the glass doors. Somewhere behind them, the orchestra packed instruments into velvet cases. Adrian loosened his tie slightly, looking more human now than polished CEO. Vanessa was out of line tonight. Claire looked down into her coffee. People like Vanessa always think people like me should stay grateful for scraps. Adrian's jaw tightened again. You should not be compared to scraps. Claire smiled sadly. You did not exactly disagree with her a week ago. The words landed quietly between them. Honest. Impossible to ignore. Adrian stared toward the city skyline for several seconds before speaking again. I know. Claire expected defensiveness. Excuses. Instead, she heard something unfamiliar in his voice. Regret. Real regret. Before either of them could continue, Adrian's phone buzzed sharply inside his jacket. He glanced down at the screen immediately. I need to take this. Claire nodded. Of course. He stepped toward the far end of the balcony corridor while Claire remained near the windows, finishing her coffee slowly. She hated admitting it, but tonight confused her. Adrian Whitmore was still arrogant, still emotionally impossible to read half the time. Yet beneath all the sharp edges, she kept catching glimpses of someone painfully lonely. That realization felt dangerous. Claire turned toward the ballroom to grab her bag when a young event assistant hurried toward her, carrying a leather portfolio. Miss Bennett. Claire looked up. Mr. Whitmore left this in the donor lounge. I think it is important. She accepted the portfolio automatically. Adrian's initials were embossed across the dark leather surface in silver. She started walking toward the balcony hallway to return it when another staff member intercepted her. The driver is waiting downstairs for Mr. Whitmore. The man explained quickly. Can you bring him directly to the car? Claire nodded distractedly and continued toward the private donor corridor. The hallway was quiet now, empty except for soft lighting reflecting against dark wood walls. Adrian stood near the far window, speaking quietly on the phone, his back turned toward her. Claire slowed instinctively, not wanting to interrupt. Then she heard her own name. No, Adrian said firmly into the phone. She does not know yet. Claire stopped completely. Her grip tightened around the portfolio. I said no. Adrian continued colder now. The Columbia recommendation was withdrawn years ago. The situation is over. Claire's heartbeat stumbled. Columbia. Her breath caught sharply in her throat. Adrian turned slightly, then, and saw her standing there frozen in the hallway. Silence crashed between them instantly. Slowly, Adrian lowered the phone from his ear. "I will call you back," he said quietly before ending the call. Claire stared at him without moving. "How do you know about Columbia?" Adrian's expression changed immediately. Not defensive. Cornered. "Claire, how do you know?" Her voice shook this time despite every effort to control it. Adrian exhaled slowly. "When the board started reviewing your background after the gala, I saw your academic records." Claire felt heat rush into her face. Humiliation. Anger. Exposure. "You investigated me?" "The board investigated everyone connected to the company." "Do not make that sound normal." Adrian stepped toward her carefully. "Claire, listen to me." But she already understood. The scholarship. The acceptance letter. Columbia University's business program. The dream she buried 6 years ago after her father got sick and the hospital bills swallowed everything. She had never told anyone at Whitmore Capital because it hurt too much to explain who she could have become. Adrian looked at her quietly. "You graduated top of your class in economics while working 2 jobs," he said softly. "Then turned down Columbia to take care of your family." Claire swallowed hard. "You were not supposed to know that." "Why?" His voice lowered further. "Because then people might realize you were always smarter than the room they trapped you in." Claire looked away instantly. The hallway suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. Adrian stepped closer carefully, not touching her. "I read your strategic development files," he admitted. "The expansion plans, the donor retention model, the restructuring proposal." Claire's eyes lifted slowly toward his. Adrian held her gaze steadily now. "Most of Whitmore Capital's strongest ideas came from you." Her chest tightened painfully. "They were not my ideas anymore once your name went on them." Adrian flinched almost invisibly at that. Outside the windows, rain slid slowly down the glass while Manhattan glowed beyond the darkness like another unreachable world. Adrian looked at Claire with something close to disbelief now. "Do you know what scares me most?" he asked quietly. Claire said nothing. Adrian's expression softened for the first time all night. "You walked into every room believing you were the least important person there," he said. "And somehow you were still the smartest." The next week should have felt like progress. Public opinion around Whitmore Capital slowly stabilized after the charity gala. Financial blogs praised Claire's composure. Investors stopped panicking long enough to breathe. Even employees inside the company seemed different now. They greeted Claire in elevators, asked for her opinion during meetings. One executive even credited her publicly during a strategy briefing. It should have felt satisfying. Instead, Claire felt increasingly uneasy, because the more Adrian looked at her with admiration, the more she remembered the way he looked at her before any of this started. People did not transform that quickly. Not really. Tuesday evening arrived wrapped in cold rain and gray Manhattan traffic. Claire sat alone in Adrian's office reviewing donor reports while most of the executive floor emptied for the night. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass walls in soft silver reflections. Adrian had left an hour earlier for a board dinner downtown, and for once the silence felt peaceful. Then her email notification appeared. Anonymous senda. No subject line. Claire frowned slightly before opening the attachment. Her stomach dropped instantly. A scanned copy of the partnership agreement filled the screen. Every detail highlighted in yellow. Public image reconstruction initiative. Temporary strategic positioning. Employee representation campaign. Beside the document sat dozens of leaked text messages between board members discussing her appearance, background, and public appeal like marketing statistics. One message stood out immediately. She is perfect, poor enough to look authentic, educated enough not to embarrass us. Claire stared at the screen in complete silence. Her chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt to breathe. Another attachment opened automatically. A photo from the gala. Adrian standing beside her beneath crystal lights, while headlines underneath read, "The CEO's Redemption Arc." Not hers. His. Suddenly, every compliment from the past 2 weeks sounded artificial in her memory. Every camera flash, every carefully orchestrated interview, every moment Adrian looked at her like she mattered. Claire closed the laptop slowly. Her hands trembled once before she forced them still. Outside the office windows, rain slid down the glass in endless silver lines while the city blurred beneath the storm. The elevator doors opened suddenly behind her. Adrian walked into the office, loosening his tie, exhaustion visible beneath his calm expression. "You are still here," he said softly. Then he noticed her face. His expression changed instantly. "Claire." She turned the laptop toward him without speaking. Adrian looked down at the screen. The color drained slowly from his face. Silence swallowed the room whole. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Claire laughed once under her breath. "Small. Broken. That is your first question?" Adrian stepped forward immediately. "Claire, listen to me." "No." Her voice shook harder now. "You listen." She stood abruptly from the chair, tears burning behind her eyes despite how desperately she tried to control them. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Adrian stayed still. "I actually started believing you respected me." "I do respect you." "Then why does this sound like a marketing campaign instead of a person?" Adrian looked down at the leaked agreement again, jaw tight with anger. "The board drafted those messages, not me." Claire crossed her arms tightly, like holding herself together physically. "But you still signed the contract." Adrian opened his mouth, then stopped, because he had. The silence after that felt devastating. Claire nodded slowly, like the answer finally settled somewhere permanent inside her chest. "Exactly." Adrian stepped closer carefully. "It was supposed to protect the company." "And what was I supposed to protect?" she whispered. His face tightened. "Claire." "No, Adrian." It was the first time she said his name without fear. Somehow that hurt him more. "You looked at me and saw a solution. Not a person. Just another problem to manage." "That is not true anymore." The words came too fast. Too honest. Claire's eyes flickered briefly with pain. But it was true once. Adrian had no answer for that. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over Manhattan while rain battered the windows harder now. Claire reached into her bag, quietly, and removed the worn leather notebook she carried everywhere. Adrian recognized it instantly. She placed it carefully on his desk between them. "Every strategy you praised," she said softly. "Every donor projection. Every expansion model." Her voice cracked slightly. "I wrote all of it hoping one day somebody would finally see me." Adrian stared at the notebook without moving. Claire swallowed hard. "Turns out they only noticed when I looked pretty enough for a ballroom." "Do not do that," Adrian said sharply. "Do not reduce yourself to what those people think." Claire looked at him with tears finally escaping despite her efforts to stop them. "That is easy for you to say when nobody has spent your entire life deciding your value before you even speak." Adrian stepped forward instinctively, but Claire moved back immediately. That hurt more than he expected. "Claire, please." She shook her head slowly. "I cannot keep standing beside someone who only learned my worth after strangers applauded me for it." Adrian's chest tightened painfully. "That is not why this changed." "Maybe not for you," Claire whispered, "but it was enough for everyone else." She turned toward the office door, then stopped briefly without facing him again. "You once told me nobody was looking at me anyway." Her voice softened, almost dangerously quiet. "The sad part is you were right." Then she walked away. Adrian remained alone beside the rain-covered windows long after the elevator doors closed behind her. The leather notebook sat unopened on his desk beneath the cold office lights. For the first time in years, Adrian Whitmore realized success could still leave a man feeling completely powerless. For 3 days, Adrian Whitmore barely slept. The city outside his penthouse windows continued moving exactly as it always had. Markets opened. Black cars flooded Manhattan streets. Reporters chased scandals across television screens. But inside Adrian's world, something fundamental had gone silent. Claire never answered his calls. Her company email was deactivated by Friday morning. Human Resources informed him she had officially submitted her resignation at 6:32 the previous evening with no forwarding address attached. Efficient. Clean. Final. Adrian sat alone in his office late Saturday night, staring at the leather notebook she left behind. The building around him was dark now, except for the pale glow of midtown lights reflecting through the glass walls. Slowly, he opened the notebook for the first time. Page after page unfolded beneath his hands. Market projections, expansion strategies, charity development, models. Entire speeches rewritten in Claire's handwriting with notes in the margins correcting his tone. Too cold here. Too corporate. Speak like a human being. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. Every major success Whitmore Capital celebrated over the past 2 years carried traces of Claire Bennett hidden quietly beneath his name. And somehow he never truly saw her. A loose folded paper slipped from the back cover onto the desk. Adrian picked it up carefully. It was not a business report. It was a rough pencil sketch. A hospital waiting room. Fluorescent lights. Plastic chairs. A woman sleeping upright beside a coffee machine with paperwork scattered across her lap. Claire had written one sentence beneath the drawing in small, careful handwriting. Sometimes survival looks invisible from far away. Adrian stared at the page for a very long time. Then something inside him finally broke open. Monday morning arrived gray and cold over Manhattan. The annual Whitmore Capital Shareholders Gala occupied the Grand Crescent Hotel, one of the most exclusive financial events in New York. Investors packed the ballroom beneath massive chandeliers, while reporters gathered near the stage waiting for Adrian's appearance. Everyone expected damage control. Another polished speech. Another billionaire protecting his empire. Backstage, Adrian adjusted his cufflinks silently, while Nathan from communications paced nervously nearby. The board approved the revised statement, Nathan said quickly. If you stay focused on growth projections and avoid discussing the assistant situation directly, we can stabilize this by Tuesday. Adrian looked up slowly. The assistant situation. Nathan froze slightly. Adrian repeated the phrase, quieter this time, like testing how ugly it sounded out loud. That is what we are calling it. Adrian, we are trying to protect the company. Adrian glanced toward the ballroom entrance where hundreds of wealthy donors and executives waited beneath crystal lights. Then he thought about Claire sitting alone in hospital hallways while men like him debated public optics over $12 cocktails. Suddenly the entire room felt unbearable. No, Adrian said calmly. Nathan blinked. No. Adrian removed the folded speech from a jacket pocket, then tore it cleanly in half. Nathan stared in horror. Adrian, what are you doing? Something I should have done weeks ago. The ballroom lights dimmed moments later as Adrian stepped onto the stage alone. Applause echoed automatically through the massive room. Camera flashes exploded. Investors smiled politely. Adrian stood behind the podium in silence for several seconds while the crowd settled. Then he looked directly at them. 3 weeks ago, he began quietly. I humiliated someone in public because I assumed status mattered more than character. The ballroom went still immediately. Reporters lifted cameras higher. Adrian continued calmly. At the time, I believed I was protecting professionalism. What I was really protecting was my own arrogance. Nervous murmurs spread through the audience now. Somewhere near the front table, several board members exchanged alarmed looks. Adrian ignored all of them. Most of you know Claire Bennett as the woman standing beside me during recent foundation events. His voice lowered slightly. What you do not know is that Claire Bennett was also the mind behind some of the most successful initiatives this company has ever claimed credit for. A giant screen behind him suddenly illuminated. Slides appeared one after another across the ballroom. Strategic proposals, donor retention models, economic forecasts. Every document displayed Claire Bennett's original handwritten notes beside finalized company reports. Audible gasps moved through the crowd. The smartest person in my company, Adrian said steadily, was never me. Silence swallowed the ballroom completely. Adrian looked directly into the cameras now. She worked harder than anyone in this building while receiving half the recognition and none of the respect. The board members near the stage looked furious. One investor stood abruptly. Adrian did not stop. And when she finally became visible to this world, people treated her humanity like a branding strategy. His jaw tightened slightly, including me. Somewhere in the back of the ballroom, reporters were already sending breaking headlines live. Adrian barely noticed anymore. For the first time in years, he was not managing perception. He was telling the truth. The final slide appeared behind him then. A new foundation initiative. The Bennett Grant for working students. Full tuition support for caregivers forced to abandon higher education because of family hardship. Claire's white satin gloves appeared framed beside the announcement photo. The same gloves she wore the night she walked into a ballroom and changed everything. Adrian stepped away from the podium slowly. Money can buy influence, he said quietly into the silence. But it cannot buy class. I learned that from a woman I once failed to see. No applause followed immediately. Just stunned silence beneath the chandeliers while cameras flashed endlessly across the room. And somewhere across Manhattan, sitting beside her mother in a quiet hospital room, Claire Bennett looked up at the television screen with tears slowly filling her eyes. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft, rhythmic beeping of medical monitors and the distant hum of traffic beyond the windows overlooking Queens. Claire sat beside her mother's bed, holding a paper cup of coffee gone cold nearly an hour earlier, while the television replayed Adrian's speech for the third time that morning. Financial analysts argued loudly across the screen about whether he had destroyed his career or saved it. Claire barely heard any of them. She kept replaying one sentence instead. I learned that from a woman I once failed to see. Her mother glanced toward the television weakly before looking back at Claire with a knowing smile. That man looks miserable. Claire laughed softly despite herself. You noticed that too? Claire! Her mother reached carefully for her hand. A man only risks his pride in public when something matters more than winning. Claire looked down quietly. The truth was, she had spent so long surviving that she no longer knew what to do when someone finally chose her openly. Not strategically, not secretly, publicly. Her phone buzzed gently against the chair beside her. One new message. Unknown number. I'm downstairs. No pressure. No cameras. Just honesty this time. Claire stared at the screen for several silent seconds before exhaling slowly. I will be back in a few minutes, she whispered to her mother. Take your time, her mother said softly. Queen's traffic will humble any billionaire eventually. Outside the hospital, cold autumn sunlight spilled across crowded sidewalks while nurses and families moved through the entrance carrying flowers and paper bags of cafeteria food. Adrian stood near the curb beside a black town car, wearing a dark wool coat, both hands in his pockets against the wind. No security team, no reporters, no polished performance. Just Adrian. The second he saw Claire emerge through the hospital doors, something in his expression softened instantly. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. Claire stopped several feet away from him. Neither of them spoke immediately. New York noise rushed around them, while fallen leaves scraped softly across the sidewalk. Finally, Adrian broke the silence first. I was not sure you would come down. Claire crossed her arms lightly against the cold. I almost did not. He nodded once like he deserved that answer. Fair. Adrian reached into his coat carefully, then held out something wrapped in dark leather. Claire recognized it immediately. Her notebook. But different now. The worn edges had been restored carefully with new stitching, while the cover carried embossed silver initials beneath her name. Claire Bennett. Not Whitmore Capital. Not confidential property. Hers. Claire stared down at it quietly. You fixed it, she whispered. Adrian shook his head slightly. No, his voice lowered. I returned it. Something painful tightened in Claire's chest at that. She traced her fingers gently across the leather surface while the city moved endlessly around them. The board must hate you right now, she said softly. Adrian gave a faint, tired smile. Most of Wall Street hates me right now. Does that scare you? He looked directly at her then. Completely honest. Losing money never scared me. Claire swallowed slowly. Adrian stepped closer carefully, leaving enough space for her to move away if she wanted. But losing the person who taught me what kind of man I had become, his voice roughened slightly. That terrified me. Claire looked down briefly, emotions pulling too hard beneath the surface now. Adrian, no, he shook his head gently. You spent months listening to me speak over you. Let me say this properly. The wind lifted slightly between the buildings while traffic lights reflected against passing windows nearby. Adrian's eyes never left hers. The night of the gala, I looked at you and saw someone who did not belong in my world. His jaw tightened faintly. The truth is, you were the only person in that ballroom who actually did. Claire felt tears sting her eyes instantly. Adrian continued quietly. You walked into rooms designed to make people feel small and somehow stayed kind anyway. He glanced briefly toward the hospital entrance behind her. You carried your family. You buried your own dreams. You kept helping people who barely noticed your name. His voice softened further. And I was arrogant enough to think status could measure your worth. Claire blinked quickly against tears she could no longer fully hide. Adrian reached into his coat pocket one last time. Not a ring, not some dramatic spectacle. Instead, he carefully unfolded the white satin gloves from the gala. Cleaned, pressed, preserved perfectly. Your mother was right, he said quietly. Elegance has nothing to do with money. Claire stared at the gloves in stunned silence. Adrian smiled faintly then. Small, real. It looks like surviving without losing your heart. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Claire laughed softly through tears and shook her head. You know, she whispered, for someone who runs billion-dollar negotiations, you are surprisingly terrible at apologies. Adrian's eyes warmed finally. That bad. Terrible. Can I try again over dinner? Claire looked at him for a long second while Manhattan's sunlight reflected across the street around them. Then slowly, carefully, she stepped closer. Business only? She teased quietly. Adrian smiled fully for the first time since she met him. Not this time. 6 months later, framed inside